The Galactic Military Academy floated like an oversized, pretentious jewelry box against the backdrop of three colliding nebulae, because nothing said, "We're training the next generation of elite warriors," quite like situating your campus against the most photogenic cosmic phenomena in the quadrant. The Academy boasted a rich tradition spanning 12,000 cycles, which administrators never tired of mentioning in recruitment materials, convocation speeches, and anywhere else they could wedge it in. 12,000 cycles of excellence, droned Professor Viltax. As he adjusted his ocular enhancers for the 6th time, he'd managed to work the phrase into his lecture in under 20 minutes. A new record, surely. The assembled cadets, representing 73 species from across the Galactic Confederation, shifted in their ergonomically designed seats, which were supposedly calibrated for multi-species comfort, but somehow managed to be universally uncomfortable. The classroom itself was a marvel of engineering, with adaptive atmospheric controls, telepathic learning aids, and hollow projection systems so advanced they occasionally became sentient and tried to unionize. Today, Viltax continued, his secondary breathing sacs inflating with academic self-importance, we begin our annual Primitive Species Combat Analysis course, a cornerstone of your tactical education. A ripple of anticipation moved through the room. This was the course everyone had been waiting for, a chance to study lesser species and their adorably unsophisticated approaches to warfare. It was essentially the military equivalent of watching toddlers attempt quantum physics. In the third row, a cadet with iridescent scales that changed color with his mood, currently displaying a bored taupe, leaned over to his Prontillian classmate. "I hope it's not the Murgles again," he whispered. "Last year's class got the Murgles, and their idea of warfare is throwing pointy rocks while riding giant slugs," he added. "I heard," whispered back the Prontillian, whose name was technically unpronounceable, but who went by Click due to the sound their mandibles made, that they might use the Doraxians. At least they developed nuclear capabilities before wiping themselves out. Professor Viltax cleared all 4 of his throats simultaneously, an impressive feat that always silenced a room. "This cycle," he said, "we will be studying a particularly fascinating case, the species designated as humans from the planet Earth." A collective groan rippled through the classroom. "Oh, come on," muttered a gelatinous blurb cadet, who was currently occupying 3 seats. "Earth? That backwater. They haven't even achieved proper interstellar travel. Barely made it to their own moon," agreed a tall, willowy Quanadarian whose ancestral trees had been spacefaring for millennia. Viltax's mouthparts twitched in what passed for a smile among his species. "I understand your disappointment. However, I assure you that human warfare presents unique educational opportunities." At the back of the room, Commander Zaktar, the Academy's most decorated tactical instructor, leaned against the wall. Unlike Viltax, who had never seen actual combat, unless you counted the faculty parking dispute of cycle 9876, Zaktar had participated in 14 major conflicts. His carapace bore the honorable scars of battle, and his left sensor stalk had been replaced with a cybernetic enhancement after an encounter with a Tregorian warbeast. "You will find," Zaktar interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like a phase disruptor, "that appearances can be deceiving." The cadets straightened when Zaktar spoke. Even the most arrogant Academy hotshot up and listened. "Humans," he continued, moving to the front of the room with the fluid grace that came from centuries of combat training, "have not yet achieved what we would consider advanced technology. Their weaponry is primitive, their strategies often rudimentary, yet they possess qualities that warrant our attention." A Heliac cadet raised a luminous appendage. "Sir, my pre-AC Academy briefing said humans are fragile, carbon-based life forms, with no natural defenses, no venom, no significant physical strength, no regenerative capabilities, no exoskeletons. What could we possibly learn from them? Zeke's ocular ridge rose slightly. An excellent question, Cadet. Perhaps you will answer it yourself by the end of this course. Brillax, clearly annoyed at having his lecture hijacked, reclaimed control of the room with a display of academic territoriality. As I was saying before Commander Zakhtar's insightful interruption, we will begin with an overview of human history, focusing specifically on their military conflicts. The main hollow projector hummed to life, displaying a slowly rotating image of Earth, a rather unremarkable Classum planet. Viltax narrated, approximately 12,756 kilometers in diameter, one large moon, primarily nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere. Surface is 70% covered in dihydrogen monoxide. They live in liquid, asked a desert-evolved Sandar cadet, horrified. Near it mostly, Viltax clarified, though they do occasionally immerse themselves in it voluntarily for what they call recreation. Several cadets shuddered. Humans have been engaging in organized warfare for approximately 10,000 of their solar orbits, which is roughly 3,000 galactic standard cycles. Their technological progression has been irregular. The hollow shifted to display a timeline of human weapons development. Note how they spent nearly 5,000 years using essentially the same technology, sharpened metal objects and rudimentary projectile weapons, before suddenly accelerating their development in the last 300 years. A Quidian cadet with hypersensitive empathic abilities raised a tendril. Professor, I'm detecting unusual emotional patterns from both you and Commander Zakhtar when discussing these humans. There's an undercurrent of respect, perhaps concern. The room fell silent. Viltax's secondary eyelids flickered rapidly, a sign of discomfort among his species. Your empathic abilities are impressive, Cadet, Zakhtar interjected smoothly, but perhaps prematurely deployed. Reserve judgment until you've seen the evidence. The hollow display shifted again, showing a rotating selection of Earth's military leaders throughout history. We will begin our analysis tomorrow with what humans call their First World War, Brillax announced. I suggest you all review the preliminary materials on human physiology and planetary conditions. You may find it enlightening. As the cadets filed out of the classroom, animated discussions broke out immediately. This is ridiculous, huffed a mechanoid cadet, whose partially organic brain was housed in a precision-engineered body. What could these humans possibly teach us about warfare? My secondary processing unit contains tactical simulations that could outmaneuver their entire species. I don't know, mused a rare Vulcan exchange student whose species was known for their philosophical perspective. There's something in the instructor's demeanor that suggests more than they're saying. At the front of the now empty classroom, Zedkar approached Viltax. You didn't tell them? Of course not, Viltax replied, his voice low. That would defeat the purpose of the exercise. Half of them will resign their commissions by the end of this course, Zetar predicted, his battle-scarred carapace gleaming under the artificial lights. Yes, agreed Viltax, suddenly sounding far less pompous and far more weary. That's precisely the point. Better to lose them now than in the field. The hollow display flickered one last time before shutting down, momentarily showing an image that would have shocked the departing cadets. A human military vessel being welcomed into the Galactic Confederation's central docking bay, a diplomatic event that had been kept classified from the general population. Tomorrow, Briltak said quietly, they begin to understand what we're really preparing them for. Zedkar nodded grimly. And why half of them aren't ready for it. The next day, the classroom had been transformed into what the Academy catalogue pretentiously called an immersive tactical observation chamber, but was essentially just a fancy theatre with seats that could accommodate everything from methane-breathing gas clouds to silicon-based rockoids who considered sitting down once a decade to be excessive leisure. The cadets filed in, many clutching data tablets displaying hastily skimmed information about Earth. Most had spent precisely 11 minutes on their assignment, the exact minimum needed to avoid academic probation, before returning to more pressing matters like interspecies dating apps and complaining about cafeteria food that attempted to cater to 73 different biochemistries and managed to disappoint every single one. "Did you know," announced the Helax cadet, to no one in particular, "that humans have to shut down consciousness for approximately 1/3 of their day? They call it sleep, and they just stop functioning." "Inefficient," agreed the mechanoid, who required a maintenance cycle only once per lunar month, though not as bizarre as their reproduction method. "Let's not discuss that," groaned a photosynthetic chloran, whose leaves turned a nauseated purple at the thought. Professor Viltax swept into the room with Commander Star close behind. Today they were joined by a third instructor, Professor Iktomo from the psychology department, a Keonid whose constantly shifting brain structure was visible through her transparent cranium. Rumor had it she could read minds, though Academy policy strictly prohibited faculty from mentally probing students without signed consent forms in triplicate. "Today," Viltax announced, "we begin our analysis of human warfare. We will start with their First World War, a conflict that engulfed much of their planet from the years 1914 to 1918, according to their calendar." The lights dimmed. The blurb cadet took advantage of the darkness to extend a gelatinous pseudopod toward the snack compartment of a neighboring Traxian, who slapped it away with practiced irritation. "Observe," Viltax continued, "the state of human technology during this period." The holo display activated, showing images of early 20th century Earth technology, automobiles, biplanes, telegraphs. Several cadets snickered. "Fossil fuel combustion engines," the mechanoid cadet whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "My personal transport pod as a juvenile was more advanced." "We get it," muttered the Zithar, whose scales had shifted to an annoyed magenta. "You're technologically superior to a species that doesn't even know we exist. Very impressive." Commander Star stepped forward. "What you are about to witness has been compiled from human historical records. These are not simulations. These are actual recordings of human combat." His voice took on a distinct edge. "I advise you to pay close attention to their behavior rather than their technology." The holo display shifted, and suddenly the room was filled with the sights and sounds of trench warfare. The Western Front materialized around them, a hellscape of mud, barbed wire, and destruction that seemed to stretch to infinity in both directions. "Ooh," said a previously vocal cadet, their confidence faltering. The immersive projection was disturbingly effective. The cadets could smell the mud, the rot, the distinctive chemical signatures of early human explosives. They watched as waves of soldiers climbed from trenches, only to be cut down by machine gun fire, their bodies piling up in no man's land. "This is inefficient," the mechanoid cadet observed, though with notably less smugness. "Observe the pattern," Professor Iktomo spoke for the first time, her brain structure pulsing with activity behind her transparent skull. They continue the same tactical approach despite catastrophic losses. The scenes shifted to show gas attacks, soldiers clawing at their faces as their lungs blistered and failed. Several cadets flinched visibly. "They used chemical weapons on their own species?" asked the chloran, genuinely shocked. Her own people had an evolutionary history of chemical communication and considered weaponized chemicals taboo in the extreme. Indeed, Frilax confirmed. And note, they deployed these weapons despite having full awareness of the effects. This was not a case of unfortunate scientific ignorance. The immersive projection shifted again, showing field hospitals overflowing with wounded. Medics worked frantically, amputating limbs without proper sterilization, the floors slick with blood. A Caridian cadet suddenly writhed in distress, their empathic tendrils retracting defensively. "The pain signatures, they're overwhelming," they gasped. 2 classmates helped them from the room. Tsar nodded to an assistant, who adjusted the emotional dampening field for the remaining empathic species. 4 years, Viltax continued clinically. 4 years of this stalemate, with minimal territorial changes, despite millions of casualties. The display showed the grim statistics. Over 9 million combatants dead, 21 million wounded, 8 million civilian casualties. "But why?" asked the Vulcan exchange student, their normally philosophical tone replaced with genuine confusion. Why continue once the pattern of failure was established? "An excellent question," Professor Iktomo replied, the colors in her visible brain shifting to a contemplative blue. The resulting odor resembled what might happen if anxiety could spoil like milk. "Today," Professor Viltax announced, his earlier academic pomposity noticeably subdued, "we examine psychological warfare and modern combat methodologies." Commander Star stood at parade rest, his battle-scarred carapace catching the light. "Before we begin," he said, "a reminder that psychological support services are available through the Academy's Wellness Center." Several cadets exchanged glances. The Wellness Center was typically used for minor issues like post-teleportation nausea or homesickness, not for processing interspecies trauma. The lights dimmed once more. This time, Professor Ickmore took the lead, her transparent cranium pulsing with cautionary red patterns. "Human conflict evolved beyond mere territorial or resource disputes," she explained. "They developed warfare based on ideological differences, abstract concepts for which they willingly sacrificed millions." The display activated, showing jungle warfare from what humans called the Vietnam War. Booby traps, guerrilla tactics, villages destroyed by both sides. "Note the asymmetrical approach," Starr pointed out. "The technologically inferior force adapting to neutralize their opponent's advantages." The cadets watched as human soldiers, barely more than juveniles, patrolled through dense vegetation, visibly terrified but continuing forward. One triggered a concealed explosive and disappeared in a spray of biological matter. "They send their young?" asked the Chloran, leaves trembling. "Their warriors typically begin training between ages 17 and 19, Viltax confirmed. "Some as young as 16 in certain conflicts." "But they're not even fully developed at that age," protested a Nerg cadet, whose species required 30 years of maturation before adulthood. The footage shifted to show psychological operations, propaganda posters, leaflets dropped from aircraft, radio broadcasts designed to demoralize enemy forces. Humans discovered that breaking an opponent's will could be more effective than breaking their bodies, Ickmore observed, her brain structure forming patterns that suggested professional admiration. Then came scenes from what humans designated terrorist attacks, civilian structures collapsing, explosive devices in public gathering places, the aftermath of chemical weapons in residential areas. "This isn't warfare," objected the mechanoid cadet. "There's no tactical advantage to these targets, no military value." "Fear," explained Starr simply. "The weapon is fear itself." The display shifted again, showing clinical images of psychological warfare techniques, sleep deprivation, sensory manipulation, stress positions. The cadets watched human prisoners being systematically broken down through methods that left few physical marks but destroyed minds. "They do this knowing the neural consequences?" asked a cadet, cousin species to Professor Ickmore, clearly disturbed. "They develop these techniques through careful study of their own neurology," confirmed Ickmore. "They understand precisely what they're doing." The Vulcan exchange student, whose philosophical demeanor had been steadily eroding, finally spoke. "But why? Why develop weapons specifically to prolong suffering rather than end combat efficiently?" Before any instructor could answer, the most disturbing footage yet appeared. Urban warfare in densely populated human cities, snipers targeting water-gatherers, hospitals bombed, child soldiers with weapons almost too large for them to carry. They use their own offspring as combatants? The Zithar cadets' scales had turned a horrified white, a color they'd never displayed before. "In some conflicts, yes," Viltax answered, his tone for once entirely devoid of academic distance. Then came footage of ethnic cleansing campaigns, mass graves, detention camps, systematic elimination of population groups based on genetic, cultural, or religious differences. The hive mind cadet disconnected half their neural cluster in self-defense. "This cannot be representative," insisted a previously quiet astrolabe cadet. "This must be anomalous behavior, not typical warfare." "Unfortunately," Commander Zatar responded, "these patterns repeat throughout their history, across geographic regions and centuries." A final series of images appeared. Humans using primitive projectile weapons in their own educational facilities, juveniles fleeing, small bodies covered by emergency responders. They attack their own learning centers. The question emerged as a collective gasp. That was the breaking point. An exilian cadet abruptly stood, all 6 limbs trembling visibly. "I withdraw from this course," they announced, voice crackling through their translation module. "Cadet, return to your—" Brillax began, but was interrupted by another student rising. "I also withdraw," stated the mechanoid. "My combat algorithms cannot process the irrationality of this species." Like a dam breaking, nearly a third of the class rose in succession, declaring their withdrawal. The psychological impact had reached critical mass. Professor Ickmore raised a placating tendril. "Your reactions are anticipated." However, the Zithar cadets' scales flashed angry red. "You subjected us to this intentionally. What possible educational value—" "The value," Commander Zedar cut in, his battle-hardened voice silencing the room, "is in understanding what we face." "We face," echoed the Quiridian empath, who had returned with enhanced emotional shielding. "These humans are quarantined on their planet. They're no threat to the Confederation." An uncomfortable silence fell as the 3 instructors exchanged glances. "Unless—" The Vulcan student's voice was quiet, but carried to every corner of the room. "Unless they're not quarantined anymore." Professor Viltax sighed, all 4 of his breathing sacs deflating simultaneously. "This course is dismissed for today," he said. "Those who wish to formally withdraw may file their documentation with the registrar's office." As cadets rushed for the exits, some already frantically composing resignation notices on their data tablets, the blurb cadet oozed closer to the instructors. "They're coming, aren't they?" they asked, their gelatinous form quivering. "Humans are joining the Confederation." Commander Star regarded the cadet with what might have been respect. "Report to my office tomorrow, cadet. Perhaps you're suited for diplomatic security after all." The classroom emptied rapidly, leaving behind only the lingering scent of alien fear and the soft hum of the hollow projector, still displaying a single image. Earth, tiny and blue, deceptively peaceful from orbit. The administrative wing of the Galactic Military Academy resembled what might happen if bureaucracy developed sentience and built itself a monument. Endless corridors of identical offices, each containing identical data terminals, operated by increasingly frazzled officials attempting to process the unprecedented wave of resignation forms flooding the system. 47%, muttered Dean Krillix, a normally imposing thoraxian whose impressive horn array now drooped with stress. 47% of third-cycle cadets have submitted withdrawal documentation. The Board of Overseers is demanding explanations. The Dean's office, ostentatiously large to accommodate both his species size and his ego, currently hosted an emergency meeting of the senior faculty. Verilax, Zdar, and Ickmore faced their superior with varying degrees of concern, from Viltax's transparent anxiety to Zdar's battle-hardened calm. The course fulfilled its intended function, Zdar stated flatly. Better to lose them now than in actual diplomatic contact situations. "That's not the point," Krillix cried, his secondary mandibles clacking in agitation. "This institution has maintained an 89% graduation rate for 7,000 cycles. Do you have any idea what this will do to our standings in the intergalactic education rankings?" Ickmore's transparent cranium pulsed with barely concealed contempt. "With respect, Dean, perhaps institutional prestige shouldn't be our primary concern when preparing for first contact with a species that developed nuclear weapons before space travel. Outside in the Academy's main courtyard, rumors spread faster than a Regalian nerve virus. Cadets huddled in anxious groups, their various biological compositions creating a visual mosaic of worry. Those still enrolled debated with those processing resignation, while academic advisors rushed between groups. Attempting damage control, the blurb cadet, who had somehow transformed overnight from class clown to information broker, insisted, "They've been approved for Confederation membership." Their gelatinous form rippled with self-importance. "My sources are impeccable." "Impossible," countered a tall Axaran, whose compound eyes reflected sunlight in kaleidoscopic patterns. "They would need centuries of ethical evolution before qualifying." "Unless..." The Vulcran exchange student interjected softly, "The Confederation needs them." That statement dropped into the conversation like a quantum singularity, warping everything around it. "Needs them?" The Zithar cadet, scales cycling through shades of disbelief, asked. "What could the Confederation possibly need from creatures who commit atrocities against their own kind?" The Vulcran's expression, difficult to read for non-Vulcrans, shifted subtly. "Warriors," they said simply. Meanwhile, in a secure communication chamber 3 levels beneath the Academy's surface, Commander Zadar stood before a holographic projection of Admiral QXT, Supreme Commander of Confederation Defense Forces. The Admiral's tentacled visage filled the room, his bioluminescent status markings indicating extreme secrecy protocols were in effect. "The psychological impact assessment was accurate?" the Admiral inquired, his voice modulated to prevent eavesdropping by even the most sensitive auditory organs. "Precisely as predicted," confirmed Zidar. "Approximately half withdrew immediately. Another 20% are exhibiting severe distress but haven't formally resigned, and the remaining 30%. Zedar's battle-scarred mandibles clicked in what might have been pride. "Currently requesting additional information about human combat methodologies. Several have submitted requests to transfer to diplomatic security tracks." "Perfect." The Admiral's primary eye cluster gleamed with satisfaction. "And the true purpose of the exercise remains secure. None suspect the selection protocol." Tiskatar paused. One cadet demonstrated unexpected insight, a blurb designated Classification 7C, Monitor them closely. Recruitment potential, the Admiral ordered. Possibly their psychological profile suggests adaptability beyond their species norm. As this classified conversation continued, Professor Viltax found himself cornered in his office by a delegation of agitated cadets demanding answers. The mechanoid, the Zithar, and 3 others crowded the room, while Viltax's anxiety glands worked overtime. "You engineered this," accused the mechanoid, optical sensors pulsing with indignation. "This course was designed to trigger mass resignation." That's preposterous," stammered Viltax, breathing sacks inflating defensively. "The Primitive Species Combat Analysis course has been part of the curriculum for centuries." "But humans haven't," the Zithar countered, scales flickering accusatory red. "You specifically selected Earth, knowing the psychological impact their warfare would have." Before Viltax could formulate a sufficiently academic denial, the door hissed open. Professor Ickmore glided in, her transparent cranium pulsing with what appeared to be annoyed resignation. "Yes," she stated bluntly, "the course was designed as a screening mechanism. Congratulations on figuring it out. You've passed the first test." The cadets froze in collective confusion. "Ickmore," Viltax sputtered. "Security protocols are being modified as we speak." She interrupted. "Admiral's orders." In the main administrative hall, Dean Krillix was delivering a carefully crafted statement to the assembled academy staff. "Recent developments necessitate curriculum adjustments," he announced, his drooping horn array now artificially stiffened with supportive gel for the appearance of authority. "The unusual withdrawal rate should be viewed as a successful recalibration of our candidate pool rather than an institutional failure." Across the academy, information terminals simultaneously activated, displaying a recorded message. The image showed a formal diplomatic ceremony, Confederation representatives standing alongside humans, actual humans, in elaborate formal attire that barely disguised their warrior bearing. The date stamp indicated this had occurred 3 standard months ago. By executive order of the Galactic Confederation Council, a formal announcement echoed through the Academy's speakers. Earth has been granted provisional membership status. Integration protocols are now in effect. Chaos erupted across campus as the news spread. But in Commander Zittar's office, a small group of cadets, those who had neither resigned nor succumbed to distress, gathered in tense silence. Among them stood the Blurb, the Vulcran, and surprisingly the formerly arrogant mechanoid. "Congratulations," Star addressed them, his battle-scarred form somehow more imposing in the confined space. "You've been selected for the Interspecies Diplomatic Security Initiative. Your first assignment begins tomorrow." "What assignment?" asked the Blurb, their gelatinous form quivering with equal parts fear and excitement. The door slid open, revealing 3 figures no cadet had expected to see. Humans, 3 of them, wearing Confederation military insignia modified to accommodate Earth symbols. "These are your new combat instructors," Star announced, veterans of what humans call special forces. The tallest human stepped forward, surveying the alien cadets with eyes that had seen unimaginable conflict, but remained determined rather than broken. "The galaxy is changing," the human said simply. "There are threats beyond the Confederation's experience. We've been fighting our own kind for millennia. Imagine what we can do against a common enemy." The Vulcran exchange student nodded slowly in understanding. "You didn't join the Confederation for peace." "Oh, we absolutely did," the human replied with a smile that contained no humor whatsoever. "And we've learned that sometimes keeping peace requires individuals willing to do very unpeaceful things."